Are you looking to refine your sales team and increase your company's revenue? Leading your sales team is an ongoing improvement process. Join Harry Newhan from Eric Lofholm International as he interviews top sales managers in the world. Discover the best practices that rocket them and their teams towards success. Boost your recruitment, motivation, and training techniques, leading you to build a top-producing, synergetic sales team. Welcome to CSI for Sales Managers.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Harry Newhan with Continuous Sales Improvement for Sales Managers and Best Practices. Thanks for joining us today on this beautiful afternoon. And I've got a new guest here today. A friend of mine, we go way back to the early 1990s, and he's been all over the world since then. And we just reacquainted ourselves over the last few months here and wanted to bring him into the studio and want you to help me welcome Steve Jamieson, good friend of mine. And we used to work together in the past. And Steve's got some extensive experience in multiple facets of running companies, CEO, COO, and of course, sales management. So Steve, how you doing today?
I'm good. So Donna Summer wasn't available for a 90s flashback, so you got me, is that it?
No, you're high on my list. I don't know that she has the experience that our audience is looking for. But you were in the music industry way back when, weren't you?
I was a talent manager at the William Morris Agency, and which actually, when it comes to sales, was probably the best training I ever had. And that's why it's actually kind of appropriate to mention it. Talk about people that need to be motivated, need to have their hand held, need to be inspired, need process. It's actually the more famous they were, the more successful they were, the more support they needed.
That's amazing. So those stories about the prima donna effect, is some of it's true, huh?
Prima donna is sort of an unfair terminology. Okay. They're just insecure, right? The fear, that your last sale is your last sale. Hey, it's the same thing with an actor. Their last part is the last time they're going to get hired.
Wow. Yeah, I never really looked at it like that. So they got to start over every time, right?
Just like the way a salesman does, right? You don't get paid necessarily on yesterday's sales, right?
Yeah, that's true. What have you done for me lately? There you go. So while we're talking about your past as far as the music industry, tell us a little bit about your background. As much as you'd like to share, family, where you came from, where you're at, what you're doing, what you've done. Share with a little bit of the audience they can relate to you, and then we'll get into some business. Yeah,
I'm saying like the Reader's Digest version for those that didn't just date myself with what is Reader's Digest, right? So I grew up in Queens, New York, lower middle class. And it's an interesting point of view because one of the comments that I just recently had at a college reunion is that we were one of the few generations where everyone made it in my neighborhood. And I say made it, meaning that they had a better future than their parents did. Their parents were all working class people, printers, electricians, firemen, policemen. And their dream was for all their children to be professionals. And as an entire generation, right, because the expectation of the culture and the community from a Queens working class neighborhood was so high, that success wasn't considered an option, right? It was something that was expected. And so the amount of people and their enormous success stories from people like Jerry Seinfeld, on down, that came from these neighborhoods, it really was a cultural training, and which again is something that translated, as I moved out of Queens and lived in 5 different countries around the world over the years and working with large companies, large sales organizations. Again, that culture is something that I found was something not to be taken for granted. And very difficult to teach and very different to translate.
That's a great testimonial. Almost reminds me of it takes a village to raise a child. You got the whole village there. Everybody's in that natural competitive, comfortable, stimulating each other and encouraging each other and challenging each other. That sounds like pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. For me to move from representing actors and actresses and supporting their careers and representing sales organizations was really a very easy transition. I'm saying, and that's where I found that all the skills from the neighborhood to the training, to the skill sets were almost identical. And so it's a very smooth transition to realize that, it's all about human nature. It's not about process. It's not about technique. It's not about one technological advantage or competitive situation over another, right? It's, again, we all tick the same. And when you're building a sales team and building sales practices, it's the human aspect, right, that gets lost. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, how it really shows up over and over again. I always say that metrics sometimes is the enemy, not the where-all of all of that. It becomes paralyzing instead of motivating sometimes when you forget this is a human process, not an accountability process when it comes to sales.
Yeah, it's interesting. The older I get, and what I believe to be the smarter I get, the more I realize the relationship building and the relationship aspect and the humanization aspect of life, not just sales, but of life, is so important to accomplish the things you want to accomplish. Difficult to do it on your own. You need people, and for you to grow up in the streets like that in the environment, and to have that at such a young age, that's exciting and awesome. So let's get to the first question. Let's get to some business here. What do you feel in your experience, best practices, is the most important thing for you about sales management?
The first thing, and again, this you'll see the transition of where my perspective comes from, is that I never look at sales as operations. That's number one. I never look at salespeople as part of the operations team. They're talent. And when you manage talent, different than when you manage people who work a process. And so that's where I was saying earlier that you never put limitations on talented people, because they can always exceed your expectations. And so the idea that I remember early on of all the salespeople that used to come to try to service me and sell products when I was a chief executive or a chief sales officer, I always noticed that they had minimums for the month. Like they needed to do $5,000 in sales or $10,000 in sales, and they were great at achieving that minimum. And if they didn't have a minimum, what would they have achieved? What would they have gone for, right? So the case is not finding the right minimum for people, right? It's about how do you change the way they think about that sales. And so for me, the metrics is not about how much they do in a month. It's the metrics is how are they doing with the most important client that they're working with in the moment. And take away the numbers, take away the idea of that, take away the idea of competitiveness against their other sales members, and come from a place of collaboration. So if you're, again, I go back to a movie set or a TV series, the 5 stars are not competing with each other to give the best performance. They're collaborating with each other to create the best experience. And that's how a sales team has to be approached. If I think I'm getting the commission and my associate's not, how does that build collaboration if we're competing? So the idea that sports is a locker room and a competitive environment is the number one mistake. It's not a case of looking at the box score that month and seeing that I hit 300 or go 2 for 4, right? It's how did we work collectively as a team when you're in sales management to create a great results. And so the only parallel to sports is, right, not everyone bats cleanup, not everyone bats third, but I might be somebody's better wingman, right, in a sales cycle than being the guy that is a cold caller and knocking on the door. I may be better the closer, somebody may be better the opener. How do I create a structure where everyone feels equally important and equally rewarded in a collaborative team environment, as opposed to rewarding the guy who just got the signature in the sales process? And so
that's an exciting perspective.
Yeah. So, because again, if you work with creative people, metrics is not a left brain thing that motivates people, right? It's self-important. It's self-esteem. It's creating a vision, creating something far more important than what they're doing, right? So again, it begins with the kind of team you want to build and that you're hiring, right? I mean, I've had sales guys who nailed HubSpot, right? They were brilliant at process, but they couldn't sell to anyone unless it was handed to them as a lead gen from the company, right? I'm saying, so I rather find people who don't think in limitations, don't think in competition, but think in something that what they're doing. If I could convince them that what they're doing is far more important than meeting their sales quota at the end of the month, I can create magic. And so it's funny. Yesterday, I was actually called upon by a sales guy, and he was brilliant. He graduated Amherst, working 3 years for a big Fortune 500 company, and I could tell when he got to this moment of the close, he felt cheap because he said to me, "You know, Steve, it's the end of the month, and I'm getting a lot of pressure from my sales manager. And if you sign by Friday, today, I could give you a 20% discount." So he went from pitching about what the most important things he was doing for me and my business and my industry and the impact he was going to have to, a steak knife salesman. I could tell he hated doing it, right? Because somebody in management thought it's more important to get the sale on the last day of the month for his numbers and metrics, right, than the first day of the next month, which would have served me better, right?
And ultimately,
so again, it's
ultimately served the company better as well.
Absolutely. Right. And so, again, I think there's a lot of people that wouldn't want to hire me because I'm not going to push that guy to sell everything so everyone looks good on the last day of the month. Right. The important thing is to look good to the client because that's how you get referrals. That's how you build relationships. That's how you get more sales. Right. So there's different ways of creating urgency. If you can create urgency in me because it's going to have an impact on my business, you don't need to create a false metrics, right, in order to get me to sign, with a cheap 10% or 20% discount because I closed today.
No, I like that in a more simplistic terminology. It's like you're looking for quality versus quantity. You're looking for that quality guy that's going to treat his clients at a different level than a guy that's going to throw things up against the wall and whatever sticks. It's kind of like that end of the month thing. I'd rather develop up a relationship. And again, the older I get, the more experienced I get, the more I see the magic of what you just said is so valuable. So thank you very much for sharing that and validating that feeling. So let's roll to the next one. You may have covered part of this already. What do you feel is the best training idea to train somebody to, or do you look for people that already have that philosophy? Can this be something that you can train or that you can teach, or you can kind of like teach an old dog, new tricks type thing? Or do you look for somebody that already has that mentality or that feeling?
So the number one thing to do, if you're lucky, right, you hire people with great talent and they require less work, right? But if you require people that have talent that need to be developed, right, or actually don't have talent but have the work ethic, right, what you have to do for people who aren't talented, as well as for the people that are, is you don't give them a job. You give them a vision. So you give them a vision, right, that you're all doing something that's going to take them way beyond this moment. If you could get them to buy into that we're all on a very clear path and that they play an important role in getting us someplace beyond a sales number, right, beyond just the paycheck, but we want to change the business, we want to change the industry, we want to create a legacy for this group, then now you could train them. Right? Because now you've established quite a different vision, right? And so the way you do that, if that is your mission, right, to get someone to not think about sales, but think about a vision they're buying into, then the training becomes far different, right? So the most impactful training I do, which the goal is to teach people how to think differently than when I hired them, right, is the first thing that I do that's the most impactful on day one is I have an exercise where everyone has to come to the table in sales with what they think is a bad idea. And they need to suggest that idea, and no one can say no to that idea. No is not allowed in the room during this session. They have to create the best version of that bad idea to make it work. if you're only allowed to say, hey, I'm not sure that'll work that way, but here's the way I think it can work, you teach people, one, how to think positively, how to be creative, how to be innovative, once again, how to collaborate, and create an environment that people are allowed to say what's on their mind and take risks. Because no one is going to be no. There's no negativity. So it's not that you're forced to say, be a yes person, right? But now you're forced to improve that person's concept.
Boy, I like that. That teaches people how to think outside the box.
And you have to make that not a once in a while exercise. That becomes the culture every day. That becomes Queens, New York.
Yeah.
Where there is no such thing as no. There's just the best version if we're going to go this way. What I used to say to people, you put so much pressure on yourself about making the right choices. Put more pressure on yourself of making the choice right. Because you can get to the same place. If I'm going to decide whether I'm going to pay someone 10% or 20%, but they're both right answers in a commission structure. Because if I'm going to pay the guy 10%, that means I have to make sure he gets more sales, so he's going to earn the same amount of money as if I did the commission structure at 20%, right? I'm going to have a different flow. Take the pressure off. Just make the decisions that you make right, and then I'll make the joke, you're back in Queens. There is no such thing as
that's great. No, that's really cool. That's a different perspective altogether. I like it a lot. So
the bumper sticker is, what's the best version of a bad idea? And you'd be surprised how people can make great ideas out of nothing, if that's the only option they're allowed to do.
So how did you say that again? What's the best solution out of a bad idea? Version
of a bad idea. If you're not allowed to say no, and you're going to have to live with the decision, you don't want to leave that room executing a bad idea.
No, I got it.
You want to make sure that where you're going to fail, you have to figure out how you're going to make that succeed.
No.
And that's the good idea that can come out of anything. And that's the truth is, there's no such thing as a bad idea because it's just a place to start a conversation. But if the conversation goes negative, where people feel embarrassed and humiliated, now all of a sudden you're out of collaboration, you're out of people being innovative, you're out of people, being creative, and you're going to put people back in their cubicles and say, what's the next assignment that I have?
Yeah, I feel that you also create some resentment too, because you're telling them that their idea sucks. No, this is a good one. I like that. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, it's beautiful. So I'm going to skip a question or two and let's go to, what do you feel is your best practice in motivating your team, the best motivating idea?
Is, there's the old expression, right? Shock and awe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When it comes to motivating people, if you have to wait 12 months or 6 months or quarters to get rewarded, you're no longer emotionally attached to the result until the day before that quarter ends. Right? I want someone to be motivated that week, that day, that hour, that moment, right? So the idea that, like I say, if you focus on a particular project, a particular sale, and give them a reward that they don't expect in that moment, if they achieve it, like it's the too good to be true moment for them, you have their undivided attention, their undivided focus. You have a sprint to success, which then allows you to build it into a marathon. But when people don't run marathons because they get exhausted, right? Or they don't believe they can finish. And that's the same thing with sales, right? If you have to achieve $1 million in sales before you get into the club, you can't see the million. You don't see the finish line. But if I see somebody, and so people shouldn't be competing against someone who's been there for 2 years who has $1 million in sales, right? The person who joined the company, what's his realistic shock and awe moment in his first 30 days, in his first sale? That's where you have to have training that sometimes isn't universal. Rewards aren't universal. The things that motivate me may not motivate the guy across the street. So you need to be flexible. You need to be personal. You need to have that element of surprise when someone comes to work, right? You can't get them into the 9 to 5 rut or the 60-hour rut, right? The idea that they come in and go, well, what are they going to offer me today, right? Now that's motivation, right? Yeah. That's inspiration, right? And that's what I'm saying. So you have to make sure that when you're doing your sales budgeting, that you have this pool of money that you can play with. I don't want to say this is Wolf of Wall Street, right? Where you're whipping out the money, but in a sense, he wasn't that far off, right? In the idea that it was the unexpected and it was the too good to be true moments, right? And they don't have to be large dollars. There's a lot of ways to reward people with, that don't cost a lot of money, but yet are highly impactful.
Yeah, no.
So that's where, so short-term financial rewards and recognition among their peers, I'm saying, is the motivation that you could work every single day.
Actually, recognition is and a higher on the list than financial rewards for people sticking with companies and producing. So you're hitting that. But I like this element of surprise, the unexpected. It really does. It does make sense. And
the other thing that I found really motivates people is when you invite them into the inner circle they weren't expected to be in. So instead of the problem with executive management meetings is they're exclusionary. They're not inclusionary, if that's a word, right? So the idea that you bring people into meetings they never expected to be in, they get to work with people that they think are idolized in the company. In spontaneously inviting people to give them that preview of this is where they can have a permanent seat at the table because we respect your ideas. So don't be the guy that takes someone's great idea and then be the guy that explains it to everyone else in management. Bring that guy and you'll change his total self-esteem and commitment to the company and commitment to you. I'm saying because you invited him to the inner circle.
Yeah.
I'm saying that's what I meant. There's many clever ways to motivate people. But, and Harry, you and I know this when we worked together, right? We all reached a point where you felt that we would all go through a wall for each other.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that's what I meant by the culture is more important than the dollar. And we didn't get there by saying, I'll pay you $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000, right? That's not motivating, right? That's part of the reward for motivating people the right way. But I remember that working with you, right? Where you felt, right, that all of a sudden you were inside. You were with the decision makers, right? Now you weren't there every day and you weren't there on every issue, but you knew, right, how important your opinion was and that it was always heard and judged. So this is what I meant. That was important to you. That may not have been important to somebody else, right? So we motivated other people differently. But I'm saying to you is that personal.
Yeah, that was important to me, Steve. That it really was. And you read me right on that because being in the know, being in that for me was highly motivating. And it was inspiring and it was, and maybe it was part of my ego at the time. I'm not sure, but it was important because it made me feel like my voice mattered. And
the truth is it did matter. Right. And it is motivating, right? Everyone wants a seat at the table. Everyone wants that. And so the idea that you can give someone in the company a seat at the table because he has a moment that he doesn't deserve the seat every week, right? Because he's too young. But you just give people occasional moments like that. And that's how you get them to that point where it's way beyond the commission.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So now that you got me all motivated and excited, I'm going to kind of flip the script and let's go to the other side as far as, because it's not all peaches and cream. It's not all roses and dandelions, but what could be one experience that you could share? Maybe something that's bad that's happened to you in your career or negative, shall we say. It doesn't have to be bad, but negative, something that held you back or got you off course. And what did you learn from it? Kind of like what you said earlier, as far as there's no bad idea. Well, it could be like there's no bad experience. We may feel bad at the time and it may look bad, but something positive generally comes out of it. And by the way, I just thought of that because you had said that earlier. But what setbacks have you had that got you off track in your career? And what did you learn from it, turning it around, coming back?
The reality is that, and I have one really good one, but the reality is every setback I ever had, and you always have them, whether it be losing your best salesperson, losing your best management person, losing your best product, losing your best service, being financially challenged, that made me be the best of who I was in that moment. That's why they hired me. They didn't hire me, right, to manage just good times, right? They hired me for my resourcefulness in moments when they really needed me, right? It's like, I always say that people have best friends, and sometimes you have a great friendship for 25 years, but you never know how good a friend is until you need them, right? Until something bad happens. So you don't know your worth as a C-level executive until something bad happens. And that's where the best has always come right after the worst. And so one of the highlights of my career, right? So the worst always came after the highest moment, right? One of the highlights of my career that I always make a joke of is that my Post-it note invention thing was when I invented unlimited long distance, long before MCI and long before everyone else, right? I was the first person, to come out with the concept of unlimited long distance. And in a very short period of time, we had like 100,000 customers, right? And remember the old Verizon commercials where it would say, "Can you hear me now?" Well, back 20 years ago, with VoIP was first starting, where we offered this to consumers for the very first time. The problem was when you asked that question, "Could you hear me now?" The answer was no. The sound quality was so horrible that you couldn't hear. So we had 100,000 people paying $79 a month for unlimited long distance, and I had all people saying, "I can't make a phone call." Worst moment of your career, right? You reached the height of success, and now you can't service these people. Oh my gosh. Because I was buying, at a ridiculously cheap price because it was void, right? And so what did I do? So I called AT&T and I told them I had 100,000 customers and you need to sell me time at the cheapest per minute rate because that's the only way they would sell it at the time. And I had to then create a breakage model to figure out if I could make money still selling it at $79.95. And so I realized very quickly, after studying my 100,000 customers, that I would lose a fortune on 20% of my customers because they were calling like 10,000 minutes a month, right? Yeah. And I would make a fortune on 20% of my customers because they never made a phone call. And if I could make, normal small profit on that 60% in the middle, I had a business that I could survive.
Wow.
And then I could come up with the rules that if I needed to push people off the system, and so I created all these rules. And I know that when you look at, if I show you those original rules and I show you MCI and all those of the practices to manage that traffic, they copied it word for word. They didn't even change it, right? Before they came out with unlimited long distance because it was successful. So that's what I meant is that I didn't have a plan. I didn't have an idea of what I was going to do. And I had to be resourceful. I had to be creative if I wanted that business to last another 24 hours. And so that's what we get paid to do, is realize the only value we have, right, is when it goes wrong, who stands up, who figures it out, and who can show up, right? And so I'm not afraid of the setbacks anymore. I know it's my moment. And I can just tell you that is just now one of 100 moments that's happened in my career, some small, some large, that's why I go to work. That's why they need me. Otherwise they don't need me, right? They don't need me to manage a great, successful business because truth is most people can do that.
That's an amazing perspective. I hadn't thought about it that way. But it reminds me of a quote that we grew up with. The bigger the paycheck, the bigger the problems. And the bigger the problem, when you solve that problem, the bigger the paycheck. So you definitely hit it right.
People get paid, like the Steve Jobs of the world, get paid the most for their ability to innovate. But most innovation comes out of a problem, not because they had a great idea, right? And so that's the everyday person who's a C-level executive is usually solving a problem. There's the Steve Jobs group, right, who have a vision, see an opportunity, and don't wait for a problem before they innovate. And so to operate on both of those levels at the same time, be prepared for the problem, but innovate always as if you have a problem, or see the other people's problems that you're trying to solve, where your innovation needs to come from. I mean, I can just tell you, to show you how radical that concept really is. Just 3 years ago, I did a seminar for 100 top executives in an industry. And I knew the answer before I asked the question. I said, how many people have a C-level executive with the title of Chief Innovation Officer? And 3 out of 100 were able to raise their hand.
Wow.
Because most innovation happened on Thursday afternoon when every other department head would get together for a meeting, right? It wasn't considered a full-time job, right? It was considered everyone's job to come up with innovation of the direction of the company. And I'm saying, and today there's not a company that doesn't have it. They may call it something else. But that's how important, that's the difference. When people say, what's the difference between technology today, is it allows you to be a chief innovation officer and implement ideas in a heartbeat.
Yeah, now they have whole teams just to innovate.
Correct. Yeah, and the idea, and you have to apply the same thing to sales management as you do to operations. The innovation shouldn't just be on the operations side. It needs to be on the sales side just as much.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. So let's do one last question here, and we'll button it up because you give me some great stuff. I'm taking more notes than I can. I mean, there's more here. I got to re-listen to this after it goes on so that I can take better notes because I'm trying to write as fast as I can. So you're doing amazing content here. Thank you so much for our audience. Last one. Any last additional thoughts that you can think of? I mean, you've given us so much and very, very grateful for that. Any last thoughts for best practices for our audience of sales managers?
The key is, as I said, if you hire the right people, you're the smart guy at hello, right? And if you want to identify who those people are, it's a very fine line between hiring the psychology of rule breakers and people who respect their coworkers and management. That's the mix that you want. Someone who knows how to break the rules by thinking outside the box within the rules. That's the perfect person to hire. And whenever I hire somebody, I never read their resume back to them and have, because everyone has a resume that basically cured cancer, right? They had $9 million in sales and they cured cancer. So it's a useless exercise to figure out what's true or what's not, right? But what I always say to somebody is, as I turn their resume over, I say, tell me how you're going to change my life at work. Are you going to be the go-to guy that does what for me, so I don't have to do it anymore? So what are you going to do to make me a better executive? So it's not a case of what I'm going to do for you. It's what are you going to do for me? Because if you're that guy, then I'm going to take you with me where I go. So I want a team where I know this guy does this better than me, and this guy does this better than me. This guy's going to take my idea and turn it into something that I never even imagined. That's the people I want working for me. I don't want people to execute my ideas. I want people to take my ideas and go, Steve, you're selling yourself short here. Here's what we can really do. That's what I meant, is that I don't want to have a team. If I have to manage you as a sales manager, that's work for me. Manage me. Turn it around. That's where I want to come into the work, and I want to hear from you guys. What are you doing to make my world better? Because if you're doing that, you're making our world better. Yeah,
that's a great thing. My
with a great resume who claims that they turn sales. The truth is, if they were as successful as the resume says, they'd still have that job. They wouldn't be available today. There's a reason they're available. There's something missing in their development and their career that made them available for this interview today. And it's usually never what they say it was, right? That's part of the management field of figuring out why, if you're so great, why are you so available? And how could I actually make you as great as you expect it to be? That's my job. That was my job as a talent agent. That's my job as a CEO. That's my job as a CSO. That's my job as a chief innovation officer. I want to make people as great as they expected themselves to be. And then you're in the right place when you show up at work that day.
That is great. Wow, what a way to close this episode. Steve, just want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your golden nuggets here. I got a whole bag full of golden nuggets. This is fantastic. And our audience, I know I'm going to get some responses on this one because this one was off the hook. So really appreciate your time. Everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in this week to Continuous Sales Improvement for Sales Managers. Hope you enjoyed this show. We'll be back again next Tuesday. Appreciate all of you. Have a great day. Bye-bye now. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe to get notified of the latest episode. Also, to learn more about improving your sales team, visit continuoussalesimprovement for teams.com. See you in the next episode and have a great day.